Dear little one, an open letter to younger self. Chapter 8. The Rebellion of What Remains. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. You carried your stories not only as fire but also as light, to illuminate the paths of others who walked similar journeys, to spark conversations that had long been silenced. And as the fire settled into a steady glow, you realized that burning through wasn't the end of the journey. It was a beginning, an opening to something greater, something lasting. Because slowly, you were drawn to a truth that evaded definition, a sense that resistance was never the destination, but rather the shape of the journey itself. It was about shaping a hollow in the world where your essence could reverberate, a resonance that could be felt, even if never fully grasped. And that, you realized, was the true rebellion. Not to ignite others, but to be the ember that lingers, quietly altering the air long after the flame is gone, leaving traces of warmth in forgotten corners, transforming spaces without ever needing to be seen. It was not about the fire itself, but the way its memory hung in the air, reshaping everything it touched in unseen ways. By the second month at Ryerson University, you sensed that the force propelling you forward was dissipating, like a whisper fading in a cavernous room, a light trembling on the verge of collapse, struggling to hold its own against the encroaching dark. You had been promised salvation cloaked in wisdom, liberation wrapped in enlightenment, yet the deeper you ventured into their labyrinthine corridors, the more you grasped that their truths dissolved like mist, never meant to rest upon your skin. They studied you as one studies a distant star. Fascinated but untouched, you dropped out, not out of failure, but out of refusal. Refusal to be dissected, categorized, pacified. You were not seeking polite answers to questions that burned within you. Practicality, you realized, could never replace purpose. And purpose demanded everything. And still, you kept going. Because what else could you do? You packed your thoughts like bricks and carried them to the only place that recognized their weight, London, Ontario. There, among the ghosts of streets once familiar, you sought work that would leave your hands sore but your mind free. You found solace in the dust of construction sites, laying bricks by day and engaging with minds of old by night. Your home became a sanctuary, a retreat where you debated the living and the dead, where the silence of books outweighed the noise of the world. Among bricks and mortar, you met G.O., a kindred spirit who guided you through the haze of yourself, helped you quit the bottle, and reminded you of the man buried beneath the layers of forgetting. Slowly, steadily, you built yourself back, not from the grand monuments of dreams, but from the simple, steady rhythm of rebuilding. Yet, rebuilding isn't simply about laying one brick atop another. It is about reimagining what it means to be whole. You weren't trying to resurrect a past self, but to create a version of yourself that could survive the silence of exile. With each brick, you buried old ghosts and resurrected your own voice, a voice that refused to be buried under the dust of forgotten histories. And there, in the quiet of your sanctuary, you realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a daily act of resistance against the forces that would rather see you invisible. Brick by brick, page by page, you rewrote the narrative they had imposed upon you. And in doing so, you reclaimed the space that had always been yours. A home where your voice could resonate without fear, without apology. It wasn't grandeur you sought. It was the simple dignity of knowing that you had survived, and that survival itself was a triumph. And as you moved forward, history pressed close, whispering both weight and light into your steps. The flicker of hope remained, fragile, elusive, like smoke curling through unseen cracks, refusing to vanish despite the winds of fading dreams. You submitted your application for the MA in Refugee Studies at Oxford while lying on a hospital bed. Not out of vanity, not to chase prestige, but because the questions burned too fiercely to ignore. It wasn't about the institution, It was about the pursuit of understanding, the unraveling of the neo-colonial framework that shaped refugee protection in Africa. That pursuit began in Malawi, where the air was thick with the past you couldn't escape and the future your family was still struggling to survive. There, among conference tables and dusty streets, you saw the polished policies of the West falter against the weight of lived experience. It wasn't research. It was reckoning. You saw that refugee protection wasn't charity. It was control. It was an extension of empire. A subtle hand reaching across borders to claim ownership over displaced bodies. You saw how policies, wrapped in the language of compassion, served to reinforce the very hierarchies that had driven people to flee in the first place. It wasn't about saving lives. It was about managing them, categorizing them, keeping them in their place. The polished tables of refugee conferences were not sites of liberation, but stages where the powerful rehearsed their moral performances, rehearsals for a world that could turn its eyes away from the root causes of displacement. Behind every policy, you saw the unspoken truth. Refugees were expected to remain grateful, to exist in managed spaces, to survive in ways that would not disrupt the order of things. But gratitude is a burden that erases the right to question, to remember, to resist. The performances you witnessed weren't just political theater. They shaped the way refugees lived their days, marked by waiting, silence, and the constant reminder that their lives were charity, not birthright. You thought of Malawi, where your family still lingered on the margins, and you saw how this theater of compassion played out in real time. It wasn't just an abstract critique. It was a reckoning with the personal, with the weight of stories untold, with the unbearable cost of being seen only through the lens of pity. You saw it all, and you knew. The fight was never for refuge. It was for recognition, for the right to exist as more than a shadow slipping through borders. That realization marked you. It clarified everything. The questions you asked, the work you pursued, the words you wrote. It sharpened your focus, anchoring your journey in something far deeper than academic inquiry. It became a reckoning with your own story, a pursuit of dignity, not only for yourself, but for those whose voices had been muted. You saw that the fight was not just to survive displacement, but to confront it, to name its architects, and to refuse the silence they imposed. And that reckoning became your compass, guiding you forward, unrelenting and unafraid. The fight was for dignity, for the right to name yourself before they named you something else. Oxford wasn't a triumph, it was a battlefield where you would bring those ghosts with you, daring the legacy of empire to confront its reflection. You carried with you not just questions, but histories too often dismissed. Histories of people displaced, categorized, and forgotten. And in that space, where ancient stone walls whispered of colonial conquests, you laid bare the unspoken truths. One of your professors at Ryerson, perplexed by your decision to leave, reached out to close your student file. "So, where are you going from here?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity and perhaps a hint of doubt. You met his gaze head-on. "I will take my questions to Oxford University." His brow lifted, a faint smirk playing at his lips. Oxford? The same institution that built its name on the back of empire. You do realize they were the architects of the very systems you are critiquing. You nodded, unflinching. "I know exactly what they built. That's why I'm going." He leaned in slightly, intrigued but skeptical. "You want to challenge the legacy of empire by entering its most sacred halls? Doesn't that feel like capitulation? Like asking for a seat at a table that was never set for you?" Your lips curved into a faint smile, the weight of your words deliberate. "I'm not asking for a seat. I'm bringing the table." A pause thick with tension. He shifted in his chair, folding his arms. "And what happens when they refuse to listen?" "They've been refusing to listen for centuries," you said. "The difference now is that they can't pretend I'm not there. They can't lock the doors and keep their ghosts from speaking through me." He stared at you for a long moment, searching for something, perhaps certainty, perhaps doubt. Finally, he let out a sigh. a sound more resigned than dismissive. "Well, good luck with that." You tilted your head slightly. "And good luck to you too." Because both of you knew this wasn't about luck. It was about persistence, about clarity, about refusing to let the narratives of power go unchallenged. Oxford wasn't a destination. It was a reckoning. And whether they acknowledged it or not, you were carrying history through their doors, uninvited, undeniable. Because you both knew luck had nothing to do with it. It was persistence, clarity, and the refusal to let history remain unchallenged that would carry you both forward. You weren't there to dismantle monuments. You were there to ensure they bore witness to the lives they sought to erase. You didn't care for their symbols of prestige or their rituals of power. What mattered was standing in those hallowed halls and forcing them to confront the truth they'd long ignored. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about respectability or acceptance. It was about presence, undeniable, unyielding, and unafraid. It was about standing there, whole, and making it known. I am here, and you will reckon with me. And when they placed you on the wait list, it wasn't rejection. It was hesitation. The institution's inability to reconcile its past with the weight of your history. The ghosts you carried weren't what they expected. They weren't prepared to confront them in their ivory halls. You didn't mourn. You didn't beg. Institutions thrive on the belief that access is a privilege, that doors must be knocked upon softly. But you knew better. Doors don't open unless they're forced. And history? History doesn't fit neatly into a syllabus or behind polished glass cases. It walks in uninvited, dragging its chains and its truths, demanding to be heard. You weren't asking for their approval. You knew that no institution could hold the entirety of your story, but you would carry it with you regardless, forcing them to bear the weight of what they tried to ignore. You weren't looking for refuge. You were demanding reckoning. You were not asking to be let in. You were dragging history through their gates, uninvited and unbowed. They could keep their ceremonies, their rituals of power dressed in academic robes, their polished speeches that erased more than they ever revealed. You had no need for validation from those who had spent centuries perfecting the art of exclusion. You weren't looking for their approval. You were there to make them see what they had long refused to look at. The cracks in their walls, the blood beneath their foundations, the silenced stories that lingered like ghosts in their hallowed halls. But of course, they knew all this. That was not a strange truth. It had always been there, lurking beneath their polished speeches and carefully curated legacies. The question wasn't whether they saw it. It was whether they were ready to admit it, to confront the weight of what they had inherited. You carried those stories with you, not as burdens, but as flames, to ignite what had been smothered in silence. And when you walked through their doors, you didn't ask permission. You didn't need to. You were history, unbound and undeniable, demanding reckoning from a world that preferred to look away. And so you stood there, not waiting for recognition, but insisting on being seen. You weren't there to beg for acknowledgement or approval. You were there to mark your presence, to remind them that history does not fade quietly into the past. It echoes, it reverberates, and it demands reckoning. Because the truth was plain, you didn't need them. But history demands its witnesses, and you were there to make sure they saw. You would not let them turn away. The wait list was a pause, not an end. Yet it left you suspended in a space you knew too well, a place of waiting, of hovering between recognition and dismissal. You had lived too long in the in-between, not quite here, not quite there. It was the space where refugees become statistics, where their names vanish into case numbers, where their stories are reshaped to fit the narratives of those who claim to offer refuge. But you knew better. You knew that survival itself was rebellion. The act of holding on to your name, your language, your story. It defied every system built to erase you. Oxford could wait. Your fight was not for their acceptance, but for your own reckoning with the truths that shaped your exile. You discovered that the measure of a man is not in the doors he is allowed to enter, but in his refusal to disappear. It called to mind Sidney Poitier's wisdom, a lesson shaped not by indulgence, but by necessity, by the understanding that dignity is forged through responsibility and interdependence. You remembered his words. By having very little, I had it good. Children need a sense of pulling their own weight, of contributing to the family in some way. They take pride in knowing they're needed. And in those words, you recognized something of yourself. You had pulled your weight, long before the world acknowledged your presence. You had carried the weight of history, of exile, of survival. To live in the margins and carve your name into the silence was an act of rebellion, yes, but it was also an act of care, a way to hold on to the threads that connected you to those who came before you and those who would come after. Like Poitiers, you understood that dignity was not a performance, it was a practice. It was the steady work of existing, of contributing, of making yourself indispensable not to systems of power, but to the people who relied on you, to the stories that had shaped you. You knew that dignity comes not from the validation of others, but from the refusal to vanish, from doing the necessary work to build a life that refuses erasure. And in doing that work, you understood, dignity is never asked for, it is carried. What is a dream but a confrontation with exile itself? It is a rebellion against the void, a refusal to vanish into silence. The dreamers in exile know that dreams are not about luxury or escape. They are acts of defiance, declarations of existence in a world intent on forgetting. A dream in exile is no ordinary vision. It is a demand to be seen, a battle cry against erasure, an assertion that presence matters even in the face of history's indifference. In the context of displacement, a dream becomes a lifeline. Fragile, yes, but unyielding. It is a war not just against forgetting, but against the very systems that profit from the act of forgetting. It is an act of survival that insists, I will not fade quietly, I will remain. Your dreams were never just visions of the future. They were rooted in the struggle to exist, to insist on your presence in a world that preferred your absence. Fragile, yes, but defiant. They hovered between memory and hope, between survival and disappearance. To dream was to rebel against the erasure of history, to stake your claim in a life that had been denied. Yet these dreams came with ghosts, the absences, the lost lives, the muted voices. Dreams haunted by everything that could have been, by the stories cut short. But still, you dreamed. Because those dreams were the only way to make the silence bearable, the only way to carry yourself through the spaces in between. Your dreams were to surrender, to slip into that great void, to let the silence have you. It would have been easy, wouldn't it? To give in, to disappear into the quiet spaces where the world would no longer demand your presence, your pain, your history. But you knew, as Baldwin might have told you, that surrender is a kind of death. A quiet, dignified death, perhaps, but death all the same. And you were not ready to die. These dreams, fragile as they were, did not persist out of hope. Hope was a luxury the exiled cannot afford. They persisted out of something deeper, something more feral, defiance. They lived in you not as aspirations, but as refusals. They rose from the margins, not asking to be let in, but demanding to be seen, demanding to be heard in the corridors of power that had long ignored them. These dreams carried the weight of centuries, of names forgotten, of stories untold. They carried the dignity of those who dared to dream despite the odds, who understood that to dream under the weight of history was to resist erasure. And in resisting, you carried forward what the world tried so hard to bury, a testament that survival is not a passive act. It is rebellion. It is dignity made flesh. It is the insistence that, even in exile, even in silence, you will not vanish. And yet, even in moments of loss, you move forward. Because what else could you do? When you are walking through hellfire, the only way out is through. To stop is to burn. To turn back is to burn. And yet, moving forward means dragging that fire with you, letting it mark your steps, your skin, your very soul. You carry it because you have no choice. Hellfire is not a punishment for the lost. It is the burden carried by those who dared to dream, the cost of wanting more in a world that offers less. It is the weight of every unfulfilled promise, every shattered hope pressing down on your shoulders, reminding you that to want is to risk, and to risk is to burn. But the truth is darker still. Hellfire does not fade. It leaves its mark, branding you with the knowledge that the world never intended for you to rise. And the darkest truth of all, the fire never goes out. It seeps into your bones, curls beneath your skin, and lives in your blood. It strips you bare, leaves you with no armor but your own truth. It whispers in the quiet hours, reminds you that you were never meant to be whole in a world that thrives on breaking you. They will try to reduce you to silence, to render you invisible, to strip you down until there is nothing left to name. But silence is not the end. It lingers. It bears witness. It becomes a pulse beneath your skin, a weight in your chest that cannot be snuffed out. They will fail to understand that what they call erasure is only a transformation, a rebirth into something unshakable. You become the evidence of every wound they inflicted, every truth they tried to deny. And that evidence, that presence, will outlast them. It will move through time, refusing to vanish, refusing to be still. But always in the quiet moments, a voice lingered in your mind, low, insistent, like a hum beneath the surface of your thoughts. Was it his voice you were chasing? Or was it your own reflection, distorted by longing and rage? You knew what they said. A man without a father is a man without a compass. But you carried that absence like a blade, cutting your own path. You weren't trying to resurrect him, no. You were trying to conjure yourself, to make yourself real in a world that refused to see you. Did you want him to see you? Perhaps. But more than that, you wanted the world to know that you would not be confined to the lies they told about men like you. And if he ever did see you, if he recognized himself in your defiance, in your unwillingness to bow, would he understand? Would he know that you had taken his silence and turned it into a weapon? That you had made yourself from the very nothingness he left behind? And if he read your words, if he saw the man you had become, what would he think? Would he see himself in your rebellion, in your refusal to kneel, in your defiance against the stories they tried to force upon you? Or would he see something darker, something more dangerous? A son who had not been broken by absence, but who had turned that absence into a shield, into a blade? Would he see that you had taken his silence and fashioned it into a voice that could not be silenced? That you had taken the void and made it speak, made it roar? Because that is what you had done. You were not the result of inheritance. You were the result of survival, of will. The void did not consume you, it fed you. It became the thing that moved you forward when there was nothing else to cling to. You weren't writing to remember him, to bring him back. You were writing to assert yourself, to stake your claim in a world that had long denied your existence. You were writing because survival demands testimony. You were writing because silence is a death sentence, and you refused to die unseen. You told yourself you were writing about memory, the kind of memory that refuses to stay buried, that slips through borders and lingers in the places where names are stolen and stories are silenced. But you knew better. You were writing about the lies they built into the walls around you, about the places that were never meant for you to enter. You wrote because they tried to seal your history under monuments to their own greatness. And if you did not speak, they would erase you completely. They would shape you into a problem to be solved, an object to be dissected, a case study to be presented. They would steal your story, dress it in their language, and call it truth. But you knew that memory is not a gentle thing. It is a fight, yes, but also a calling. A quiet, persistent voice urging you to make sense of the past without being consumed by it. And in the act of writing, you began to understand that memory, like fire, can warm as much as it can burn. You wrote not only to refuse disappearance, but to remind yourself that even the most painful truths carry the seeds of healing. The walls you clawed at weren't meant to crumble in an instant. They would weather with time, crack by crack, until light filtered through. And it wasn't about victory. It was about presence. It was about leaving a mark, no matter how small, to say, I was here, I endured, and I will not be forgotten. There was no monument to build, no banner to wave. There was only the quiet insistence that life, yours, theirs, all of it, mattered. And in that insistence, you found the essence of rebellion. It wasn't the grand gestures that made history turn its head. It was the persistence to keep walking, keep speaking, even when the world tried to drown you out. The stories you carried were never meant to burn the world down. They were meant to keep it warm, to remind those who came after that someone once stood where they now stand and refused to be erased. To remind them that the quiet acts of survival, of holding one's ground, of naming one's truth, of walking through the world without apology, are the sparks that keep the flame alive. Because rebellion isn't always loud. Sometimes it is the silent refusal to disappear. And that was enough. That was everything.